damp blanket that refused to lift. Corporal James Whitmore stood at attention, his worn boots sinking slightly into the mud as Colonel Patterson paced before the assembled platoon. The year was 1943, and Camp A.P. Hill had become a crucible for preparing American soldiers for the European theater. James was different from the other recruits. At 32, he was older than most, with streaks of premature gray already threading through his dark hair. Before the war, he had been a surveyor in the Appalachian Mountains, spending long days calculating angles, distances, and elevations. His hands were steady, his mind mathematical, and his eyes had learned to read terrain like other men read newspapers. But none of that mattered here. Stand straight, follow orders, shoot straight ahead. That was the doctrine. That was what won wars, according to the men with stars on their shoulders. Colonel Patterson stopped in front of James, his jaw set like granite. The morning briefing had just concluded, and James had made the mistake of speaking up during the tactics discussion. Patterson's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "You got something to say about how we train snipers, Whitmore?" James hesitated. Around him, 30 pairs of eyes watched, some curious, others already dismissive. He had seen the way they looked at him during drills. The old man, the hill climber, the one who thought too much. "Sir, with respect, I believe we're missing opportunities by focusing solely on horizontal shooting positions. In mountainous terrain or urban environments, elevated positions could provide significant tactical advantages. What I call the chimney stack approach, firing from extreme vertical angles." The silence that followed was suffocating. Patterson's face reddened. "Chimney stack approach." He repeated the words slowly, as if tasting something rotten. "Whitmore, we train soldiers here, not circus performers. You think you're going to climb church steeples and factory smokestacks while Germans shoot at you?" Laughter rippled through the ranks. Sharp, cruel laughter that felt like needles against James's skin. "Sir, I'm simply suggesting that we consider all tactical advantages. In surveying, I learned that elevation changes everything about distance calculation, wind resistance, and trajectory. If we train men to understand vertical geometry..." "Enough." Patterson stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold air. "This isn't about your civilian job, Corporal. This is about killing the enemy efficiently and following established protocol. Every minute you waste with your theories is a minute we're not preparing these men for real combat." James's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. "You want to be useful, Whitmore?" Patterson gestured toward the standard rifle range, flat and straightforward, targets at 100, 200, 300 yards. "Perfect that. Master the fundamentals. Leave the innovation to the officers who actually understand warfare." The dismissal was absolute. For the next 3 weeks, James did exactly as ordered. He fired from prone positions. He practiced his breathing. He memorized the manual. And every night in the barracks, he lay awake thinking about angles, about the way elevation could extend effective range, about how a shooter positioned 20 feet above ground level could hit targets that horizontal shooters couldn't even see. He sketched diagrams in a small notebook, calculating trajectories, accounting for the increased complexity of vertical shooting. The math was beautiful, elegant in its precision. But the notebook stayed hidden beneath his bunk, away from mocking eyes. The other snipers in training were younger, faster, more confident. They had names like Jackson and Martinez and O'Brien. They competed for the best scores, celebrated their groupings, and spoke eagerly about fighting Nazis in France or Germany. They didn't speak to James much. He was the odd one, the man with strange ideas, the surveyor who couldn't let go of his civilian life. Private Jackson, a 22-year-old from Texas with quick hands and quicker mouth, made it his personal mission to remind James of his place. "Hey Whitmore, you figure out how to shoot around corners yet? Maybe you can calculate the angle for shooting backward while you're at it." More laughter. Always more laughter. Even Sergeant Davis, the grizzled range instructor who had served in the First World War, shook his head when James once tried to explain his calculations. "Son, I've been shooting for 25 years. Trust me when I tell you that warfare doesn't happen in your head. It happens in your gut, in split seconds with bullets flying. Save the mathematics for after the war." But James couldn't let it go. Every time he looked at the Virginia hills surrounding the camp, every time he saw the water tower or the roof of the mess hall, he saw opportunities. He saw angles that could save lives, positions that could turn the tide of a skirmish. He just needed one chance to prove it. That chance would come sooner than anyone expected, in a way that would change everything. The humiliation reached its peak on a gray Tuesday afternoon in late October. Colonel Patterson had organized a demonstration for visiting officers from the War Department. The camp's best snipers would showcase their skills, proving that American marksmen could match or exceed their German counterparts. It was a matter of pride, of propaganda, of justifying the resources poured into sniper training programs across the country. James wasn't supposed to participate. He had been assigned to equipment maintenance, essentially sidelined from the main event. But when Private Morrison fell ill with pneumonia that morning, Sergeant Davis reluctantly called James as a replacement. "You'll shoot standard positions only, Whitmore." "No nonsense." Davis's tone left no room for interpretation. The demonstration began smoothly. Jackson hit a target at 400 yards. O'Brien managed a difficult wind shot at 350. Martinez impressed everyone with 3 consecutive bullseyes at 300 yards. The visiting officers nodded approvingly, taking notes, discussing training methodologies. Then came James's turn. He positioned himself at the standard firing line, settling into the prone position everyone expected. The target stood at 300 yards, perfectly visible, perfectly routine. He controlled his breathing, squeezed the trigger with practiced precision. The shot went wide by 4 inches. Whispers erupted behind him. The old man's losing his edge. Should have stuck with surveying. Patterson's face darkened visibly. James felt the weight of failure pressing down on his shoulders, but something else burned hotter inside him. Frustration. Not at missing the shot, but at the waste of potential he saw every single day. Before anyone could stop him, before his rational mind could override his desperation, James stood and pointed toward the water tower at the far edge of the training grounds. "Colonel, give me permission to demonstrate an alternative approach. There's a target visible from the tower platform at approximately 520 yards. The elevated position would allow for a clear shot that's impossible from ground level due to the tree line." The silence was deafening. Patterson's face transformed from red to nearly purple. "Whitmore, you will return to your position immediately, or I will have you removed from this program entirely. We are not conducting experiments for your personal theories. These officers came to see proven techniques, not the fantasies of a corporal who thinks he knows better than established military doctrine. Sir, I only need one shot to prove that vertical positioning can extend effective combat range by... One shot is all you'd get before a German sniper put a bullet through your skull while you're playing mountain goat." Patterson turned to the visiting officers, his voice dripping with barely contained anger. "Gentlemen, I apologize for this interruption. Corporal Whitmore has been struggling to adapt to military discipline." The visiting officers exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed amused by the spectacle. Sergeant Davis stepped forward, gripping James's arm. "Let it go, son. You're making it worse." But the damage was done. That evening, James sat alone in the barracks, packing his few belongings. The transfer papers would come tomorrow. Patterson had made that abundantly clear. He would be reassigned to a supply unit, far from the front lines, far from any chance to prove his worth as a marksman. The door swung open. James expected Jackson or one of the others, coming to deliver a final mocking farewell. Instead, Captain Robert Henderson stepped inside. Henderson was one of the visiting officers from the War Department, a slender man in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and an analytical expression. He had watched the entire demonstration in silence, taking notes in a leather journal. "Corporal Whitmore." Henderson's voice was quiet, measured. "That chimney stack angle you mentioned. Show me your calculations." James froze, uncertain if this was another form of humiliation. "Sir, I don't want to waste your time with. I didn't ask if you wanted to. I asked you to show me." Henderson sat on the edge of the bunk across from James, pulling out his journal. "I spent 8 years as a physics professor at MIT before the war. I understand ballistics, trajectory, and mathematics. Show me what you've been working on. With trembling hands, James retrieved his hidden notebook. Page after page of diagrams, equations, angle calculations, wind compensation formulas adjusted for vertical shooting positions. He had spent months developing this, refining it, imagining scenarios where it could mean the difference between life and death. Henderson studied the pages in silence, his finger tracing the calculations, his eyes narrowing with concentration. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up. This is brilliant. Rough in places, needs field testing, but the fundamental mathematics are sound. Why hasn't anyone taken this seriously? James laughed bitterly. Because it's not in the manual, sir. Because Colonel Patterson thinks I'm wasting everyone's time. Because innovation isn't what the Army wants from a 32-year-old corporal from the mountains. Henderson closed the notebook carefully. I'm authorizing a field test. Tomorrow morning, 0600 hours. You'll have your chance at that water tower shot. 520 yards, elevated position, 1 bullet. If you hit the target, we implement your training methodology. If you miss, you accept your transfer without complaint. James felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Sir, Colonel Patterson will never approve. Colonel Patterson answers to the War Department and I outrank him. Henderson stood, handing back the notebook. I've seen too many good ideas dismissed because they don't fit conventional thinking. The Germans are using elevated positions in Stalingrad right now, picking off our Soviet allies from factory ruins and apartment buildings. We need men who think differently. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Whitmore. If you're watching this story and believe that innovation matters, that unconventional thinking can change outcomes, subscribe to this channel. Because what happens next will prove that sometimes the most dismissed ideas become the most valuable weapons. The door closed softly behind him. James sat in the darkness, holding his notebook, feeling the weight of tomorrow's sunrise approaching like destiny itself. The morning arrived cold and merciless. Word had spread through Camp AP Hill like wildfire. The crazy corporal with his chimney stack theory was getting one shot to prove himself. One shot to save his career, his dignity, everything he believed about the science of long-range shooting. By 0545, nearly 200 soldiers had gathered around the water tower. Colonel Patterson stood with his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. Captain Henderson checked his pocket watch, calm and methodical. The target had been placed at precisely 520 yards, confirmed by 3 separate measurements. James began his climb. The water tower ladder was slick with morning dew, each rung cold against his palms. 30 feet up, the wind hit differently. It swirled, unpredictable, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. His surveying instincts kicked in immediately, reading the air currents, calculating their effect on bullet trajectory. At the platform, he set up his position. The rifle felt different here, the angle forcing him to adjust everything he had trained for on flat ground. Below, the crowd looked small, insignificant, but their judgment pressed down on him heavier than gravity itself. He chambered a single round. The metallic click echoed in the stillness. Through the scope, the target seemed impossibly distant. The elevation changed everything about the shot. Gravity would pull the bullet down faster over this distance, but the height advantage meant he could see over the tree line that blocked any ground-level attempt. The mathematics he had spent months perfecting flooded his mind. Angle of descent, 17 degrees. Wind speed, approximately 8 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature, 42 degrees Fahrenheit, affecting air density and powder burn rate. He adjusted the scope with minute precision, compensating for variables that no standard training manual addressed. Below, someone coughed. Jackson muttered something that provoked nervous laughter. Patterson checked his watch impatiently. James controlled his breathing. In surveying, he had learned patience. The mountain didn't care if you rushed. The calculation didn't forgive shortcuts. Excellence required absolute precision, absolute commitment to the mathematics of reality. He found that place between heartbeats where the world went silent, where doubt evaporated, where only the shot existed. The trigger squeeze was gentle, inevitable, perfect. The rifle cracked, The sound rolled across the training grounds like thunder. For one eternal second, nobody breathed. Then Sergeant Davis, positioned near the target with binoculars, lowered them slowly. His voice carried across the distance, loud and clear and edged with something that might have been awe. Dead center. Perfect bullseye at 520 yards. The silence shattered into chaos. Soldiers erupted in shouts and disbelief. Henderson smiled, writing rapidly in his journal. Even Patterson's granite expression cracked, revealing something that looked almost like respect. James descended the ladder on shaking legs, his hands trembling not from fear but from the overwhelming vindication of being absolutely, mathematically, undeniably right. The transformation happened faster than James could have imagined. Within 48 hours, Captain Henderson had submitted a full report to the War Department. Within a week, James was reassigned from corporal to sergeant, placed in charge of developing a specialized training program for what they officially termed elevated position marksman training. The chimney stack approach had a real name now, real resources, real validation. Colonel Patterson never apologized. Men like him rarely did. But he stopped dismissing James's ideas, stopped blocking his access to equipment and firing ranges. The cold wall of resistance simply melted away, replaced by grudging cooperation that eventually evolved into something resembling professional respect. The training program started small. James worked with 12 hand-picked soldiers, teaching them the mathematics of vertical shooting, the way elevation changed everything about distance, wind, and trajectory. He built scaffolding structures at varying heights, created exercises that forced his students to think three-dimensionally about the battlefield. Jackson was among the first to volunteer. The cocky Texan who had mocked him relentlessly now listened with intense focus as James explained angle compensation and gravity drop calculations. After completing a successful shot from 25 feet up, Jackson approached him privately. "I was wrong about you, Sergeant. I thought you were just some old guy who couldn't let go of his civilian life. Turns out you were seeing things the rest of us were too blind to notice." James shook his hand, feeling the weight of vindication tempered by humility. "We all see different parts of the puzzle, Jackson. The key is getting people to listen when someone sees something valuable." By December, the program had expanded to 40 soldiers. By January 1944, it became official doctrine, disseminated to training camps across the United States. Snipers heading to Europe received instruction in elevated shooting techniques, learning to exploit bomb buildings, church towers, factory chimneys, any vertical advantage that could extend their effective range and provide superior battlefield awareness. Sergeant Davis pulled James aside one frozen morning, his weathered face showing something that might have been pride. 25 years I've been teaching men to shoot, and I never thought about it the way you do. You changed my mind, son. That's rarer than you think." The letters started arriving in February. Soldiers in Italy, in France, in the Pacific Theater, writing to thank the program that had taught them to think vertically. A lieutenant in Anzio described using a damaged bell tower to eliminate 3 German machine gun positions that ground-level snipers couldn't reach. A corporal in the Philippines credited elevated position training with saving his entire squad during a jungle ambush. Each letter felt like validation, but more than that, like lives saved. Like the mathematics of angles and trajectories translated into human beings who came home to their families. Captain Henderson visited one final time before shipping out to London. He found James on the rifle range, supervising a group of young recruits practicing from a 30-foot platform. "You proved that being right isn't enough, Whitmore. You also have to be persistent enough, brave enough to make people listen. That's the real lesson here." 3 years later, autumn 1946, James Whitmore stood in the lecture hall at Fort Benning, Georgia, now wearing the oak leaves of a major on his shoulders. The war had ended, but the lessons learned continued to reshape military training doctrine across all branches of the armed services. The room was filled with officers, sergeants, and civilian contractors, all gathered for the quarterly Advanced Marksmanship Symposium. On the wall behind James hung enlarged photographs. Snipers in Italian campaniles, marksmen in French church steeples, shooters positioned in Pacific Island palm trees. Each image represented a life saved, an enemy position neutralized, a tactical advantage seized because someone had learned to think vertically. The statistics were remarkable. Elevated position shooting had increased effective sniper range by an average of 32%. Casualty rates among trained elevated marksmen were 40% lower than conventional snipers. The program James had fought so hard to legitimize had become standard training, taught at every sniper school in the American military. But the numbers weren't what mattered most to James. After the lecture, a young lieutenant approached him, walking with a slight limp, a Purple Heart ribbon on his chest. "Major Whitmore, I was in your third training class, back in early '44. I used your techniques in the Hurtgen forest. There was this bombed-out factory, and I climbed to what was left of the roof structure. From up there, I could see a German position that had pinned down my entire company for 6 hours." The lieutenant paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I made the shot at 480 yards, elevated angle, exactly like you taught us. We broke through that afternoon. 17 men in my unit came home because of what you refused to let people ignore." James shook his hand, feeling the familiar tightness in his throat that came with these moments. "You made the shot, Lieutenant. You put in the work, climbed that structure under fire, trusted the mathematics. That took courage I only taught from safe training grounds." After everyone had left, James walked across the base alone, past the modern training facilities, past the rifle ranges where elevated platforms now stood as permanent fixtures. He thought about that cold October morning in Virginia, about the water tower, about the single bullet that changed everything. The surveyor from the Appalachian Mountains had become the father of American elevated position marksmanship. But more than that, he had proven something fundamental about innovation, about persistence, about the courage required to stand up for an idea when everyone around you says you're wrong. His story wasn't just about shooting. It was about seeing possibilities others dismissed, calculating angles others ignored, and refusing to let mockery silence truth. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of unconventional thinking and the courage to stand by your convictions, I want to thank you for watching until the end. Please hit that like button, leave a comment sharing a time when you had to fight for an idea.